He had more money than he could ever spend. Private jets, mansions, a name known in every boardroom in Africa. But before he gave his heart to any woman, Kwame Boateng did something no one expected. He threw away his suits, his watch, his name. Just to find out who truly loved him, before we continue, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This story will surprise you. Stay till the end because the twist will leave you speechless. Let's begin. In the city of Accra, there was a man whose name opened doors before he even knocked. Kwame Boateng was 34 years old, and by the time most men his age were still climbing, he was already standing at the top. His father had built a small shipping business from nothing, and Kwame had taken that small business and turned it into an empire that stretched across ports in Ghana, Nigeria, and beyond. He owned buildings that touched the clouds. He owned cars that turned heads on quiet streets. He had staff who answered his call before the phone finished ringing, but money, as it turns out, cannot buy peace, and it cannot buy trust. Every night Kwame came home to a house that echoed. It was a beautiful house built with imported marble and wide glass windows that looked out over the city lights, but beauty means nothing when there is no one to share it with. He would sit alone at a dining table built for 12 people, eating a meal prepared by a chef he barely knew the name of, and he would wonder what it might feel like to have someone across from him who wanted nothing but his company. His mother called him every week with the same question. "Kwame, when will you bring a wife home?" His aunties asked him at every family gathering. Even his little cousins, who barely understood what marriage meant, would ask him why he was always alone in family photographs. And every time, Kwame would smile, give a soft answer, and change the subject, because the truth was heavier than any answer he could give in a hallway conversation. The truth went back many years to when Kwame was still a boy. His father, a good man who worked with his hands and built something out of nothing, had once loved a woman before he married Kwame's mother. That woman had smiled at him, laughed at his jokes, and promised to stand by him. But the moment his father lost a shipment of goods at sea and the business nearly collapsed, she disappeared without a word. She had loved his money, not him. It took years for his father to trust anyone again, and when he finally spoke of it to young Kwame, the words stayed with the boy long after childhood had ended. "Money changes how people look at you," his father had told him one evening, sitting on the porch under a sky full of stars. "It is not your enemy, but it is not your friend either. Some people will smile at your money and call it love. Only a few will smile at you, the man, without knowing what is in your pocket." Kwame carried those words like a stone in his chest for the rest of his life. And now that he was a grown man, richer than his father ever imagined, the fear had only grown bigger. Every woman who smiled at him, he wondered, is it me she wants, or is it my name? Every gift he gave, he wondered, would she still want me without it? He had dated before. Beautiful women, intelligent women, women who could hold a conversation about business as easily as they could talk about fashion. But something always felt hollow. There was always a moment, a small crack in the conversation where he could feel that they were more interested in the buildings with his name on them than in him. One evening, his oldest friend, a man named Amara who had known him since they were boys running barefoot through the streets of their old neighborhood, came to visit. Amara was now the head of security for Kwame's company, but more than that, he was the only person Kwame trusted completely, because Amara had known him before the money, before the fame, before any of it. They sat outside on the balcony, the city lights blinking below them like scattered stars. Amara could see that his friend was troubled. "You are thinking too much again," Amara said, handing him a cold drink. "I am tired, Amara," Kwame admitted, "tired of never knowing who is real. My mother wants grandchildren, my board wants an heir to secure the company's future, and I do not even know what I want anymore, just someone who will look at me and see a man, not a bank account." Amara was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the horizon. Then he said something that would change everything. "Then stop being Kwame Boateng for a while," he said simply. "If you want to know who loves you and not your money, then take the money away. Become someone else. Watch how people treat a man with nothing. That will tell you everything you need to know. At first, Kwame laughed it off as a joke, but the idea would not leave him. It sat in his mind for days, growing stronger each time he attended another business dinner where people flattered him for his wealth. Each time another woman was introduced to him by relatives who mentioned his net worth before they mentioned his personality. By the end of the week, Kwame had made his decision. He was going to disappear. He gathered his most trusted board members and told them he needed time away, that Abana's cousin, a capable and honest man named Ya, would oversee daily operations, and that his uncle, a steady hand in the company for many years, would handle major decisions until he returned. He told his family only that he needed rest, that he was tired and wanted to travel quietly. No one questioned him too much because everyone assumed a man as busy as Kwame deserved a break. Then, quietly, without any fanfare, Kwame Boateng vanished. He cut his hair short and simple. He put away his tailored suits and gold watch in a locked drawer and instead wore faded trousers and worn-out shirts he bought from a second-hand market. He left behind his phone, his cars, his driver, everything that whispered wealth. He took only a small bag, a little cash, enough to survive humbly for a few months, and he traveled to a small town far from the city, a quiet place called Nyamekye, where nobody knew his face and nobody cared about the name Boateng. In Nyamekye, he rented a tiny room above a carpenter's workshop. The room had one window, a thin mattress, and walls that let in the sound of roosters every morning. It was nothing like the mansion he had left behind, but there was something strangely peaceful about it. For the first time in years, no one greeted him with forced smiles, no one asked him for favors, no one even looked at him twice. He took on a new name. To the people of Nyamekye, he was simply Kojo, a young man looking for work with no family name worth mentioning and no history worth asking about. He found work assisting a mechanic named Papa Yebo, a kind old man who ran a small shop fixing motorbikes and old cars. The work was hard on his soft hands, hands that had never known grease or metal or the sting of a wrench slipping. But slowly, day by day, he learned. His hands grew rough, his back grew tired. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to earn a meal instead of simply ordering one. Poverty, he learned quickly, is not just about having little money. It is about the worry that sits behind every decision. It is about counting coins before buying bread. It is about walking instead of driving because a few coins saved could mean dinner instead of an empty stomach. He had read about struggles like this in reports for his company's charity programs, numbers on a page, statistics in a meeting, but living it was something else entirely. It humbled him in ways he did not expect. It was on a warm afternoon 3 weeks into his new life when everything changed. Kojo had finished a long day of work, his stomach growling, his pockets nearly empty. He walked to the small market at the center of town, hoping to find something cheap to eat before returning to his little room. That is where he saw her for the first time. Her name was Amara, and she ran a small food stall at the edge of the market, selling wakai and kelwel to workers and travelers passing through. She was not dressed in anything fancy. Her clothes were simple, her hands calloused from years of cooking over open fires, but there was something about the way she carried herself, straight-backed, warm-eyed, quick to laugh even while working hard, that made people stop and notice her. Kojo approached her stall, counted the little money in his pocket, and realized with quiet embarrassment that he did not have enough to buy a full plate. He hesitated, ready to walk away, but Amara had already noticed him standing there, staring at the food with tired eyes. "You look like a man who has not eaten today," she said, not unkindly, just observant. "I have not," Kojo admitted, feeling strange saying such a thing out loud, a man who once owned buildings admitting he could not afford a plate of food. Without hesitation, Amara scooped a generous portion onto a plate and handed it to him. "Pay me when you can," she said simply. "A hungry man cannot work well, and a man who cannot work well cannot pay his debts anyway, so eat first." It was such a small act, but it struck Kwame harder than any business deal he had ever closed. No one had ever given him anything without expecting something bigger in return. In his world, gifts were investments, favors were currency, and kindness always had a price tag hidden somewhere. But this woman, who had so little herself, gave freely to a stranger simply because he was hungry. He returned the next day to pay her back, and the day after that to eat again, and slowly, without either of them planning it, a friendship began to grow. Amara would tell him about her day while she cooked, about her mother who was often sick and needed care, about her younger brother and sister who she was raising almost single-handedly since their father passed away years earlier. Kojo would listen, really listen, in a way he realized he had never listened to anyone before, because for once, no one was performing for him and he did not need to perform for anyone either. He learned that Amara woke before sunrise every day to prepare her ingredients. He learned that she saved every extra coin for her mother's medicine. He learned that she dreamed quietly of one day owning a proper restaurant, not for wealth, but so she could hire other women in the town who struggled the way she once did. She never once asked Kojo about his past, where he came from, or why a man his age had no family nearby. She simply accepted him as he was, a hardworking man trying to make an honest living. Weeks passed, and Kwame found himself falling for her in a way that frightened him. It was not the practiced attraction he had felt with women in the city, women who complimented his cufflinks or asked about his properties. This was different. This was watching a woman laugh at her own mistakes while cooking. This was noticing how she gave the last piece of meat to an old beggar who came by her stall every evening. This was seeing her exhausted after a long day, yet still finding the energy to help her younger siblings with their schoolwork by candlelight. But their quiet, growing bond did not go unnoticed by everyone in town. There was a man named Kofi Mensah, the son of a local trader who had made modest wealth selling building materials. Kofi had his eyes on Amara for some time, and unlike Kojo, he was not shy about showing off what he had. He would come to her stall on a shiny motorbike, wearing new clothes, offering her gifts, fabric, jewelry, even once offering to pay off her mother's hospital bills if she agreed to marry him. Amara always refused politely but firmly. "I am not for sale, Kofi," she told him once, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "You can keep your gifts. If you want my heart, bring me your honesty, not your money." Kojo, standing nearby fixing a bicycle chain for a customer, overheard this exchange, and something inside him settled like a heavy weight finally finding solid ground. Here was a woman who had every reason to accept an easier life, a woman struggling to pay for her mother's medicine, and still she refused a wealthy man's offer because her heart was not in it. He had found, perhaps, the very thing his father had told him was rare. But while Kwame was discovering peace in Nyamekye, trouble was brewing back in Accra. His uncle, the man entrusted with overseeing major decisions in his absence, had grown greedy, watching over the empire that was not truly his. Whispers began to spread among the board members that Kwame had disappeared, perhaps for good, perhaps unable to handle the pressure of leadership. Rivals in the shipping industry, men who had long wanted to swallow up Kwame's company, saw an opportunity. They began to quietly buy shares, spread rumors, and pressure the board to appoint new leadership before Kwame's absence caused the company's stock to collapse entirely. The honest manager Kwame had left in charge of daily operations, tried desperately to reach him, but Kwame had left no phone, no easy way to be found. Only Abena knew where he was, and Abena respected his friend's need for this journey, though even he began to worry as messages of trouble reached him. Back in Nyamekye, Kwame remained unaware of the storm gathering around his empire because he was consumed by something far more urgent and personal. Amara's mother had grown seriously ill. What began as a simple fever turned into something the local clinic could not properly treat. The doctors said she needed to travel to a bigger hospital, one with proper equipment, but the cost of treatment was far more than Amara could ever save from her small food stall. Kwame watched as Amara's cheerful spirit began to crack under the weight of worry. She stopped smiling as easily. She worked longer hours, barely sleeping, trying to save every coin she could. One evening, he found her sitting alone behind her stall after closing, quietly crying, thinking no one could see her. "I have decided," she told him when he sat beside her, wiping her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be seen this way. I will sell my mother's old land, the small plot my father left us before he died. It is not much, but it is the only thing of value we have left. It might be enough for the first treatment. Kojo knew what that land meant to her. She had spoken of it before, of her dream to one day build a small house on it for her mother, a place where her mother could finally rest without worrying about rent. Giving it up meant giving up on that dream entirely, and yet she did not hesitate for even a moment when her mother's life was at stake. Are you certain? Kojo asked softly. What choice do I have? Amara answered, her voice steady despite her tears. My mother raised me alone after my father died. She gave up her own comfort so my brother and sister and I could eat. If I have to give up land, gold, anything to save her life, I will do it without regret. In that moment, sitting in the fading evening light beside a woman who had nothing left to sell but was still willing to give it all, Kwame Boateng understood with complete certainty that he had found what he had been searching for all along. This was not a woman chasing wealth. This was a woman whose heart was built entirely of love and sacrifice. That night, Kwame could not sleep. He knew he could not let Amara sell the only piece of land connecting her family to her father's memory. But revealing his identity now would mean breaking the very trust he had worked so hard to build. He needed a way to help without exposing the truth too soon. He remembered an old contact, a hospital administrator in the capital who had once benefited from a charitable donation through Kwame's company years earlier. Using a public phone in town and carefully choosing his words, he arranged for Amara's mother to be quietly enrolled in a hospital assistance program, one that Kwame anonymously funded through a channel with no visible connection to his name. Amara was overjoyed, believing her mother had simply been fortunate enough to receive government aid. She never suspected the truth, but even as this crisis eased, another one was reaching its peak in Accra. Abena finally managed to send word through a mutual contact traveling to Nyamekye, warning Kwame that the company was on the verge of being taken over. Shareholders were preparing to vote him out entirely, believing he had abandoned his responsibilities. If Kwame did not return immediately, everything his father had built and everything he had grown from it would be lost forever. Kwame stood at a crossroads. Return to Accra and risk losing Amara's trust the moment she learned who he truly was, or stay in Nyamekye and risk losing his father's legacy forever. He chose, finally, to face both truths at once. He went to Amara the next morning, his heart heavier than it had ever been. He found her at her stall, preparing food as she did every day, humming softly to herself, unaware that her entire world was about to shift. Amara, he said, his voice trembling slightly, there is something I must tell you, and I am afraid once I do, you may never wish to see me again. She looked up, confused by the seriousness in his tone. Kojo, what is wrong? My name is not Kojo, he said slowly. My name is Kwame Boateng. For a moment, she simply stared at him, not understanding. Then, as realization dawned, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. She had heard that name before. Everyone in the country had heard that name before. It belonged to one of the wealthiest men in Ghana, a name attached to buildings and businesses far beyond anything a simple mechanic's assistant could ever touch. That is not possible, she said, stepping back. You are lying. I wish I were, Kwame said gently. I came here pretending to be poor because I wanted to know if someone could love me without knowing about my money. I have been tested before, hurt before by people who only wanted what I had. And then I met you and you gave me food when I had nothing. You never once asked about my past, and you showed me more kindness than anyone in my entire life. I did not mean to fall in love with you, Amara, but I did, and I could not keep lying to you any longer. Amara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of sadness alone. They were tears of anger, betrayal, confusion, all mixed together. You lied to me for months, she said, her voice shaking. You let me believe you were struggling like me when you had everything. You let me sell my thoughts, my fears, my dreams to a man wearing a mask. I know, Kwame said, his own eyes wet now. And I am sorry, but everything I felt for you was real. The friendship, the comfort, the love, none of that was pretend. Amara turned away from him, unable to look at him any longer, and walked back into her small home without another word. Kwame stood outside for a long time, the weight of his choice pressing down on him harder than any business failure ever had. He knew he had to leave for Accra immediately to save his company, but leaving now felt like abandoning the very thing he had come to value more than any business empire. Still, with a heavy heart, he traveled back to the city, determined to fix both broken pieces of his life. In Accra, Kwame returned like a storm breaking through clouds. He walked into the boardroom where shareholders had gathered to finalize his removal, and the sight of him, thinner, rougher, but unmistakably Kwame Boateng, silenced the entire room. He spoke with a clarity and honesty he had never used in business before, no longer hiding behind polished words, but speaking as a man who had learned humility firsthand. He exposed his uncle's greed with evidence Amara had quietly gathered during his absence. He reassured nervous shareholders with a vision for the company's future, one grounded not just in profit, but in the values his father had first built the business upon. Within days, the takeover attempt collapsed entirely, his position secured once more, his empire safe. But even as he celebrated this victory with Amara and Yaw, his mind remained in Nyamekye with a woman who now believed he had betrayed her. Days turned into a week. Kwame could not silence the ache in his chest. He knew wealth and power meant nothing if the one person who had loved him honestly now saw him only as a liar, so he made his final decision. He returned to Nyamekye not as Kwame Boateng the billionaire in an expensive suit, but simply as a man humble and sincere, ready to ask for forgiveness with nothing to hide behind. He found Amara at her stall once more, though her smile, the warmth he had grown to love, was gone, replaced with guarded silence. "I did not come to convince you to love a billionaire," Kwame said quietly, standing before her. "I came to ask if there is still room in your heart for Kojo, the man who fixed motorbikes beside you, who listened to your dreams, who fell in love with your kindness before he ever knew what his own money could not buy. That man was never pretend. He is still standing here in front of you." Amara looked at him for a long moment, her heart clearly wrestling between the hurt of betrayal and the memory of everything genuine they had shared. "How do I know this is not another test?" she asked softly. "How do I know you will not disappear again the moment life becomes difficult?" "You do not have to know right away," Kwame answered honestly. "I am not asking you to trust me completely today. I am only asking for a chance to earn that trust back the same way you earned my heart, slowly, honestly, one day at a time." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the sounds of the market around them. Then, finally, Amara took a small step closer. "You hurt me," she said, "but I also remember who fed me laughter during my hardest days, who never once made me feel small for being poor. If I say yes to giving this a chance, know that I do it for that man, and if you ever lie to me again, there will be no second chances." "I understand," Kwame said, relief and gratitude flooding through him. "I promise you, no more masks, no more hiding, just the truth, always." In the months that followed, Kwame did something few in his position would ever consider. Instead of asking Amara to abandon her small life and move into his world of luxury, he invested in her dream instead. He helped her open a proper restaurant in Nyamekye, not as a gift meant to buy her affection, but as a partnership built on the respect he had for her hard work and ambition. She hired other women from the town who had once struggled just as she had, giving them the same chance she never had growing up. Their wedding, when it finally came, was not a grand spectacle meant to show off wealth. It was held in Nyamekye, the town where their story truly began, filled with the people who had known them simply as Kojo and Amara before the world learned the truth. Amara stood proudly beside his old friend. Amara's mother, fully recovered, cried tears of joy watching her daughter marry a man who had proven in the end that his love was worth more than any fortune. Kwame Boateng had entered Nyamekye searching for a woman who could love him without his money. What he found instead was a woman who taught him that true wealth was never about what a person owns, but about what a person is willing to give, their time, their kindness, their honesty, even when they have nothing else left to offer. And perhaps that is the lesson worth carrying long after this story ends. The people worth keeping in life are rarely the ones drawn to what you have. They are the ones who stay, who care, who give freely long before they ever know what you are capable of giving back. If this story touched your heart, like this video, subscribe and share it with someone who believes in real love. Comment your thoughts below. More stories are coming soon.